Staff Sergeant Maria Santos walked through the cold concrete corridors of Fort Davidson, her boots echoing against the walls like a steady heartbeat. In her hands, she carried a clipboard thick with inventory sheets, page after page of equipment lists, serial numbers, and storage locations. To anyone watching, she looked like just another soldier stuck with the boring job of counting supplies. But Maria was so much more than that. The other soldiers at the base didn't see it that way, though. As she passed the break room, she heard the familiar snickers and whispered comments that followed her everywhere. "There goes Santos again," muttered Corporal Jake Miller, not bothering to lower his voice, still playing with her little lists and clipboards. His buddy, Sergeant Pete Wilson, chuckled. "Yeah, what a waste. All that training just to count boxes all day. Guess not everyone can handle the real work." Maria's jaw tightened, but she kept walking. She'd heard it all before. Ever since she'd been assigned to equipment management 6 months ago, the jokes never stopped. They called her the inventory queen behind her back. They said she was soft, that she couldn't cut it in the field, that the Army had stuck her in the supply depot because she wasn't tough enough for anything else. They had no idea how wrong they were. The truth was, Maria had requested this position. Not because she couldn't handle combat. She'd proven herself in 3 tours overseas, earning commendations for bravery under fire. Not because she was afraid of danger. She'd volunteered for some of the most dangerous missions her unit had ever undertaken. She'd asked for this assignment because she was preparing for something bigger, something that required her to know every inch of this base, every piece of equipment, every hidden corner and forgotten storage room. Maria Santos was training to become part of an elite counterterrorism unit, the kind of training that happened in shadows, away from prying eyes, the kind of preparation that looked boring on the outside but was deadly serious on the inside. But nobody else knew that. Her commanding officers had agreed to keep her real mission classified. To everyone else, she was just the soldier who couldn't hack it in the field. As she made her way to Storage Building C, Maria's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Colonel Richards, her real handler. "Phase 2 assessment begins today. Stay alert." Maria's pulse quickened. For months, she'd been memorizing layouts, studying security protocols, and identifying potential weaknesses in the base's defenses. Today, she would be tested on everything she'd learned. She pushed open the heavy metal door to Storage Building C and stepped inside. The building was massive, 3 stories tall and filled with everything from ammunition to medical supplies. Most soldiers avoided this place. It was dusty, poorly lit, and filled with the kind of equipment that nobody wanted to deal with. Perfect for someone trying to blend into the background, Maria began her inventory check, moving systematically through each section. M4 rifles in Section A, check. Body armor in Section B, check. Communications equipment in Section C, check. But as she worked, she noticed something odd. Several boxes of high-tech surveillance equipment were missing from their designated spots. Equipment that should have been under strict security protocols. She made a note on her clipboard and continued working. Then she noticed something else. Footprints in the dust that didn't belong. Fresh prints leading toward the back of the building where the emergency exits were located. Maria's training kicked in. She set down her clipboard and quietly moved toward the source of the prints. Her hand instinctively went to the service pistol at her hip, the one thing that reminded her she was still a soldier, even if everyone thought she was just a supply clerk. As she reached the back corner of the building, she heard voices, low, urgent whispers coming from behind a stack of supply crates. Maria crept closer, using her knowledge of the building's layout to stay hidden. "The security feeds are down for another 10 minutes, someone was saying in accented English. "That gives us enough time to move the equipment." "What about the girl?" another voice asked. "The one with the clipboard?" "She's nothing, just some washout they stuck in supply duty. Won't be a problem." Maria's blood turned to ice. These weren't soldiers. These were infiltrators. And they'd been using her building, her responsibility, to steal classified equipment. She slowly reached for her radio, but stopped when she heard footsteps approaching her position. Multiple sets of boots, moving with military precision. These weren't random thieves. These were professionals. Maria pressed herself against the wall and counted the voices. At least 4 men, maybe more, armed, trained, and clearly part of something much bigger than a simple theft. Packages secure. She heard one of them report into what sounded like a satellite phone. Phase 1 complete. Moving to Phase 2. Phase 2. Maria's mind raced. If they were talking about phases, this wasn't just about stealing equipment. This was part of a larger operation. Suddenly, the building's lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in an eerie red glow. And then Maria heard something that made her stomach drop. Explosions. Multiple explosions coming from different parts of the base. The building shook, and dust rained down from the ceiling. Car alarms began wailing outside. She could hear shouts and gunfire in the distance. Fort Davidson was under attack, and Maria Santos, the soldier everyone thought was just good enough to count supplies, was trapped in a building with armed terrorists who had no idea that they'd just cornered the one person on the base who knew every secret, every hiding spot, and every way in and out of this facility. The men were moving now, their whispers replaced by urgent commands. "Secure the building," one of them ordered. "No witnesses." Maria smiled grimly in the darkness. They thought she was just some harmless supply clerk. They were about to learn just how wrong they could be. Maria's training took over completely. 6 years of special operations experience flooded back as she moved through the red-lit building like a ghost. Every creak of the floor, every shadow, every piece of equipment became a tool in her arsenal. The terrorists were spreading out, searching for her with tactical flashlights that cut through the emergency lighting. She counted their voices again. 5 men, all armed with what sounded like assault rifles based on the metallic clicking she heard as they checked their weapons. "Find the girl," their leader commanded in heavily accented English. She could have called for backup. If only they knew, Maria thought. She knew this building better than her own apartment. Every storage room, every maintenance tunnel, every forgotten corner that hadn't been on any official blueprint for years. She slipped behind a row of medical supply crates and made her way toward Section D. Hidden there, behind boxes of old uniforms that hadn't been moved in years, was something the inventory sheets didn't list. A cache of weapons that had been lost during a paperwork mix-up 3 months ago. Maria had found them during one of her late-night mapping sessions and decided to leave them there, just in case the explosions outside were getting closer. Through the small windows near the ceiling, she could see orange flashes lighting up the night sky. Whatever was happening to Fort Davidson, it was big. These 5 men in her building were just one small part of a coordinated attack. She reached the hidden cache and quickly armed herself. A Sig Sauer pistol with extra magazines and an M4 carbine that felt like an old friend in her hands. For the first time in 6 months, Maria Santos felt like herself again. "Contact at Building C," she heard one of the terrorists report into his radio. "One possible witness. We're handling it." "Negative," came the response through static. "Phase 2 is beginning early. Extract what you can and move to Rally Point 3. "We don't have time for cleanup," Maria frowned. Rally Point 3? She knew every designated rally point on this base. There was no official Rally Point 3, which meant these attackers had done their homework. They had intelligence about base operations, maybe even inside help. A beam of light swept past her hiding spot, missing her by inches. They were getting closer, moving in a coordinated search pattern that told her these weren't ordinary terrorists. These men had military training. "Over here," one of them called softly. "Found her clipboard," Maria cursed silently. She'd dropped it when the lights went out. Now they knew exactly where she'd been. "Spread out," the leader ordered. She can't have gone far. That's when Maria decided to show them exactly how far wrong they were. She moved silently to an overhead position, climbing onto a stack of supply crates that put her 12 feet above the floor. From here, she could see their flashlight beams sweeping back and forth below her. 4 men in tactical gear moving with professional precision. Wait, 4 men. She'd counted 5 voices earlier. Where was the 5th? Her question was answered when she felt the cold barrel of a rifle pressed against the back of her neck. "Don't move," a voice whispered behind her. "Drop your weapons," Maria's mind raced. He'd climbed up behind her while she was focused on the others. Professional mistake, but not a fatal one. "You're making a big mistake," she said quietly. letting her rifle slip from her hands. It clattered onto the crates below. "The only mistake was you being in the wrong place at the wrong time," the terrorist replied. "Now climb down." Slowly. But as Maria began to move, she did something the terrorist wasn't expecting. Instead of climbing down, she rolled backward, using his own rifle barrel as a pivot point. The move caught him completely off guard. His weapon discharged harmlessly into the ceiling as Maria twisted around and drove her elbow into his throat. The terrorist stumbled backward, gasping for air. Maria grabbed his rifle and pushed him off the 12-foot stack of crates. He hit the concrete floor with a sickening thud. The gunshot had given away her position, but it had also given her something more valuable. One of their weapons and the element of surprise. "She's armed." One of the remaining terrorists shouted. "North side elevated position." Bullets began chewing up the crates around her. These men weren't playing games anymore, but neither was Maria. She opened fire, using her elevated position and knowledge of the building to rain down precise shots on the terrorists below. Her first burst caught one of them in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his weapon flying. Her second burst forced the other two to take cover behind a wall of ammunition boxes. "This is impossible," she heard one of them mutter. "Intelligence said she was just a supply clerk." "Intelligence was wrong," Maria called out, her voice echoing through the building. "I'm Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, and you just picked the wrong building to invade." The remaining terrorists went silent. She could hear them whispering urgently to each other, reassessing their situation. Good. Let them worry. Maria used the momentary lull to check her phone. No signal. The explosions outside had probably taken out the communications tower, but that also meant backup wasn't coming anytime soon. She was on her own. She moved positions using her knowledge of the storage areas to stay one step ahead of her attackers. Every few minutes she would take a shot, keeping them pinned down and reminding them that she was still there, still fighting. But as the firefight continued, Maria began to piece together something that chilled her to the bone. These men weren't just here to steal equipment. The way they talked about phases, rally points, and extraction times, this was a military-style operation. And if they had inside intelligence about the base layout and security protocols, that meant someone on the inside was helping them. Someone who knew about her real assignment. Someone who had told the terrorists that the woman in Building C was just a harmless supply clerk. Someone who had deliberately sent her into a trap. The realization hit her just as another explosion rocked the building, this one much closer than the others. Through the smoke and dust she saw something that made her blood run cold. More armed figures were entering the building. Not soldiers coming to help. More terrorists, at least 6 of them, armed with heavy weapons and moving with deadly purpose. She was outnumbered 10-1, trapped in a building with limited ammunition, and cut off from any chance of backup. But as Maria Santos checked her remaining magazines and prepared for the fight of her life, she smiled grimly in the darkness. They still thought she was just a supply clerk. They had no idea that the woman they'd cornered was about to turn this storage building into their worst nightmare. The new group of terrorists moved through Building C with military precision, their night vision goggles glowing green in the darkness. Maria could see them from her elevated position. 6 heavily armed men spreading out in a coordinated sweep pattern. They weren't looking for stolen equipment anymore. They were hunting her. "Target is in the north section," their leader reported into his radio. "Female, armed, highly dangerous. Previous team underestimated resistance. Highly dangerous." At least they were learning. Maria counted her remaining ammunition. 2 magazines for the M4, 1 for her sidearm. Against 11 armed terrorists, it wasn't nearly enough for a straight fight. But Maria Santos had never won her battles through firepower alone. She'd won them through intelligence, preparation, and making her enemies' advantages work against them. She moved silently through the rafters of the building, using maintenance catwalks that didn't appear on any official blueprint. As she moved, she could hear the terrorists coordinating their search below. "Teams Alpha and Bravo, sweep sections A through C," the leader commanded. "Team Charlie, secure the exits. No one leaves this building alive, no one leaves alive." This wasn't about containing a witness anymore. This was about eliminating someone who had seen too much, fought back too hard, someone who could identify them. Maria reached a junction where several storage areas met and stopped. From here, she could access the building's electrical systems, ventilation shafts, and, most importantly, the automated fire suppression system. An idea began forming in her mind, a dangerous idea, but one that might level the playing field. She slipped down into Section F, where chemical supplies were stored. Cleaning solvents, industrial degreasers, and other compounds that most soldiers never thought twice about. But Maria had spent months cataloging every single item in this building, including the safety protocols for hazardous materials. Working quickly in the darkness, she began mixing certain compounds together. Not enough to create an explosion. That would be too dangerous in a building full of ammunition. But enough to create thick, choking smoke that would neutralize their night vision advantage and force them to fight on her terms. As she worked, her radio crackled to life for the first time since the attack began. "All units, this is command," came a familiar voice. "Colonel Richards, her handler. Fort Davidson is under coordinated attack. Multiple buildings compromised. All personnel report to designated safe zones immediately." Maria keyed her radio. "Command, this is Santos in Building C. I have eyes on terrorist cell, approximately 11 hostiles. Building is compromised, requesting immediate backup." The silence that followed lasted too long. When Richards finally responded, his voice sounded different. "Santos, what is your current status? Are you armed?" Something in his tone made Maria's blood turn cold. She'd worked with Richards for 8 months, preparing for her counter-terrorism assignment. She knew his voice, his mannerisms, his way of speaking, and right now he sounded like a man who already knew the answers to his questions. "Colonel," she said carefully, "what's my security clearance level?" Another pause. Then, "Maria, you need to surrender to the personnel in your building. They're there to extract you to safety. Extract her to safety. Not rescue her. Not provide backup. Extract her." The pieces fell into place with horrible clarity. Richards wasn't her handler. He was her betrayer. The man who had recommended her for this counter-terrorism training was working with the terrorists. He'd placed her in this building, given her access to classified equipment inventories, and told the attackers exactly where to find her. But he'd made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated what Maria Santos was capable of when she stopped pretending to be helpless. "Copy that, command," she said into the radio, her voice steady. "Surrendering now." She clicked off the radio and smiled grimly. Let Richards think his plan was working. Let him believe she was just another pawn in his game. The chemical mixture she'd prepared was ready. Maria attached it to the building's ventilation system and triggered the release. Within seconds, thick gray smoke began pouring through the air ducts, filling the building with choking clouds that turned the terrorists' high-tech equipment into useless junk. Shouts erupted from below as the terrorists found themselves blind and gasping. Maria pulled on a maintenance respirator from a nearby safety station and moved through the smoke like a wraith. "Night vision is down," one of the terrorists yelled. "Switching to thermal. Negative on thermal." Another voice called back. "The smoke is too thick. Fall back to—" His words were cut off as Maria's rifle spoke from the darkness. 1 down, 10 to go. She moved again, using her knowledge of the building to strike from unexpected angles. The terrorists were trying to regroup, but they were fighting blind in an environment where every advantage belonged to her. "Where is she?" the team leader shouted. "Report positions." "Section A, nothing." "Section B, negative contact." "Section D, she's—" The voice cut off in a grunt of pain as Maria's elbow connected with the terrorist's temple. 2 down. But as she dragged the unconscious terrorist behind a stack of equipment, Maria found something that made her stomach drop. A detailed blueprint of Fort Davidson, marked with assault routes, security weaknesses, and timed explosive positions. This wasn't just an attack on her building. This was a complete takeover of the entire base, and according to the timeline on the blueprint, they were only halfway through their operation. Her radio crackled again. This time it wasn't Richards. It was a voice she didn't recognize, speaking in the same accented English she'd heard from the terrorists. "Phase 3 is go. Repeat, Phase 3 is go. All teams converge on command center. The colonel is in position. The colonel is in position." Richards wasn't just working with the terrorists. He was leading them into the heart of Fort Davidson's operations. Maria felt a cold fury building in her chest. For months, she'd trusted this man. She'd followed his orders, accepted his assignments, believed he was preparing her for something important. Instead, he'd been grooming her as a scapegoat, setting her up to take the blame for whatever was about to happen. But Richards had made a fatal error in judgment. He'd assumed that Maria Santos was just another soldier who would follow orders without question. He'd never imagined that the woman he'd tried to frame was exactly the kind of person who would fight back with everything she had. The smoke was beginning to clear, and Maria could hear the remaining terrorists regrouping near the main entrance. 8 men, still heavily armed, still coordinated. They thought they had her trapped. They had no idea that they were the ones in a trap. Maria checked her watch. According to the blueprint, Phase 3 would begin in 15 minutes. That gave her 15 minutes to neutralize the terrorists in her building, get to the command center, and stop Richards before he completed whatever plan he'd set in motion. 15 minutes to prove that the supply clerk they'd underestimated was about to become their worst nightmare. She chambered around and moved toward the sound of their voices. It was time to remind everyone exactly who Maria Santos really was. Maria moved through the clearing, smoke like a predator who had finally stopped hiding. The 8 remaining terrorists were clustered near the main entrance, their confidence shaken but their weapons still ready. They thought they were hunting a trapped supply clerk. They were about to discover they were facing a woman who had spent 3 years in Afghanistan's most dangerous provinces, a soldier who had earned her combat stripes in places where hesitation meant death. She struck fast and silent. The first terrorist never saw her coming, a knife thrust between his ribs that dropped him without a sound. 7 left. The second one turned just in time to see Maria's fist before it connected with his jaw, snapping his head back and sending him crashing into a stack of ammunition crates. 6 left. "Contact! She's behind us!" one of them shouted, spinning to fire wildly into the shadows. But Maria was already gone, using the building's layout like a deadly maze. She appeared behind them, her rifle chattering in controlled bursts that scattered the group and sent them diving for cover. "This is impossible," the team leader snarled into his radio. "Send more men, we need—" "Negative," came the response. "All teams are committed to Phase 3. Handle your situation and report to extraction point." Maria smiled grimly as she reloaded. No backup was coming for them. They were on their own, just like she was. She triggered the building's emergency lighting system, flooding sections with brilliant white light that destroyed their dark adapted vision. Then she hit the fire alarm, adding confusion to their disorientation. One by one, she picked them off. A sniper shot from the catwalks. A close-quarters takedown in the narrow corridors between storage sections. Each engagement was quick, precise, and lethal. When the smoke finally cleared completely, Maria Santos stood alone in Building C, surrounded by the evidence of what happens when you underestimate the wrong person. But there was no time to celebrate. According to her watch, she had 8 minutes before Phase 3 reached completion. 8 minutes to reach the command center and stop Richards from finishing whatever he'd started. She sprinted toward the building's exit, grabbing extra ammunition and a tactical radio from one of the fallen terrorists. As she burst through the doors, the full scope of the attack became clear. Fort Davidson was burning. Explosions had taken out the communications tower, the motor pool, and half the barracks. Emergency vehicles raced between buildings, their sirens wailing in the night. But there was something wrong with the pattern of destruction. The attacks were too precise, too selective. Someone with inside knowledge had chosen exactly which targets would cause maximum chaos while leaving the command center intact. Richards needed the command center operational for whatever he was planning. Maria commandeered a military jeep and raced across the base, her mind racing as fast as the vehicle. What was Phase 3? What could be so important that Richards would betray his own country, his own soldiers? The answer came as she reached the command center's outer perimeter. The building was surrounded by more terrorists, but these weren't the same caliber as the ones she'd fought in Storage Building C. These were elite operators, moving with the kind of precision that spoke of years of training. And standing among them, directing their positions, was Colonel Richards himself. Maria parked the jeep behind a damaged Bradley fighting vehicle and studied the situation. At least 20 hostiles, all in tactical gear, all focused on protecting whatever was happening inside the command center. Getting through them would be like walking through a meat grinder, unless she stopped thinking like a supply clerk and started thinking like the special operations soldier she really was. Maria keyed the captured radio to the frequency the terrorists had been using. When Richard's voice came through, coordinating his men's positions, she waited for the right moment. "Colonel," she said quietly into the radio, "this is Staff Sergeant Maria Santos. We need to talk." The silence that followed was deafening. Then Richard's voice, tight with barely controlled anger. "Impossible. My people confirmed you were neutralized." "Your people were wrong about a lot of things," Maria replied. "Just like you were wrong about me." She could see Richards through her rifle scope, standing near the command center's main entrance. He was looking around frantically, trying to pinpoint her location. "You have no idea what you're interfering with," Richard said. "This is bigger than you understand." "Then explain it to me," Maria said, moving position as she spoke. "Explain why a decorated army colonel decided to sell out his own base. Explain why American soldiers had to die tonight. Those soldiers were expendable." Richard snapped, his mask of control finally slipping. "This whole base is expendable. In 6 hours there's going to be a terrorist attack on American soil that makes 9/11 look like a training exercise. The only way to stop it is with the intelligence gathered here, and the only way to get that intelligence is to stage your own terrorist attack and steal it," Maria finished. "Let me guess. You found out about a real terrorist plot, but instead of reporting it through proper channels, you decided to play hero. Stage an attack, steal the intelligence, and claim credit for stopping the real attack." The silence told her she was right. "How many people know?" she asked. "How many of the men out there think they're doing something patriotic?" "Enough," Richard said. "More than enough to finish this." That's when Maria made her move. Not toward the command center, but toward something much more important, the base's emergency broadcast system. If Richards needed the intelligence from the command center to stop a real attack, then she needed to make sure that intelligence reached the right people. She fought her way through Richards' outer perimeter, using every skill she'd learned in 3 combat tours. Room clearing, urban warfare, close quarters combat. All the training that everyone thought she'd forgotten while counting supplies. When she reached the broadcast center, she found 2 more terrorists guarding the equipment. They went down hard and fast, never knowing what hit them. Maria activated the emergency broadcast system and began transmitting everything she'd learned. Richard's betrayal, the fake terrorist attack, the location of the real intelligence. She broadcast it all on every frequency she could reach. Military, civilian, emergency services. All stations, this is Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, ID number 2748951. Fort Davidson is under attack by domestic terrorists led by Colonel James Richards. Repeat, Colonel Richards is a traitor. He has compromised base security to steal classified intelligence. As her message went out over the airwaves, Maria heard vehicles approaching the broadcast center. Richards had figured out what she was doing, but it was too late. Her message was already reaching the right people. Within minutes, she heard the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors approaching the base. Real backup was finally coming. Richards' voice crackled over the terrorist radio, filled with rage and desperation. "All teams, fall back to extraction point. Mission is compromised." But as Maria watched through the broadcast center's windows, she saw something beautiful. Richards' men weren't following orders anymore. The ones who had believed they were serving their country were laying down their weapons. The ones who were true mercenaries were being overwhelmed by arriving reinforcements. Colonel Richards found himself standing alone in front of the command center, abandoned by his followers and surrounded by the very soldiers he'd betrayed. Maria walked out of the broadcast center and approached him slowly, her rifle trained on the man who had tried to use her as a pawn in his twisted game. "You want to know the funny thing, Colonel?" she said as military police moved in to arrest him. "I really was just checking equipment inventory when this started. All that counterterrorism training you told me about, all those classified assignments, I made them up." Richards's face went white. "What?" "I knew something was wrong 3 months ago when you started asking too many questions about base security, so I played along. Let you think I was your perfect little recruit while I gathered evidence against you." Maria smiled. "Turns out all that time counting supplies taught me exactly what was missing when it went missing, and who had access to take it. As the military police led Richards away in handcuffs, he turned back to her with pure hatred in his eyes. "You're still nothing, just a supply clerk who got lucky." Maria Santos watched him go, then looked around at the soldiers who had gathered to hear her story. Men and women who had mocked her, ignored her, dismissed her as someone who couldn't cut it in the real army. "Ma'am," said Captain Morrison, one of the officers who had arrived with the reinforcements, "I don't understand. If you weren't really in counter-terrorism training, then how did you—" Maria looked at him and smiled. "Captain, I've got 3 Bronze Stars, 2 Purple Hearts, and commendations for valor from operations in Kandahar, Fallujah, and Mosul. I requested assignment to equipment management because after 6 years of combat, I wanted to try something different, something quiet." She gestured toward the burning buildings around them. So much for quiet. As the sun rose over Fort Davidson, Maria Santos found herself surrounded by soldiers who no longer saw her as just a supply clerk. Word had spread quickly about what had happened in Building C, about how she'd taken on impossible odds and won. But the moment that meant the most came when Corporal Jake Miller, the same soldier who had mocked her just hours earlier, approached her with genuine respect in his eyes. "Sergeant Santos," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology." "We all do." Maria looked at him and nodded. "Just remember, Corporal, you never know who you're really dealing with until the shooting starts." 6 months later, when the real story came out in the newspapers, they called her the hero of Fort Davidson. They wrote about the supply clerk who had single-handedly stopped a terrorist attack and exposed a traitor in the ranks. But Maria Santos knew the truth. She hadn't been a supply clerk who became a hero. She had always been a hero who happened to be checking inventory,